Hi folks, welcome to this final video in our Chapter 6 on formulating the reward and compensation strategy. In this segment, we're going to look at some very specific issues that relate to formulating the reward strategy as it relates to workers who are contingent or part-time, those executives, senior level executives, vice presidents and CEOs, and we're also going to have a look at employees who are expatriates and work in foreign subsidiaries of their company. So let's have a look at contingent workers. We're really looking at part-timers or even contract workers who aren't employed on a full-time permanent basis. So this is why I say that would include your contract workers, because it's not really permanent. And in 1996, and even though this sounds like old data, that was only 19% of Canadian employees, and most of them were choosing to be part-time because, maybe the major breadwinner was earning money outside, and maybe the one that's staying at home wanted to just work part-time as they were raising a family. But that's been almost a 50% increase since 1976. I don't have a statistic on what it is now, but I can tell you it's definitely more than 19%. In fact, it could be dependent on the industry as well. I know in teaching, where I work full-time, in our department specifically, where we have a lot of faculty, almost 50% of that faculty, or thereabouts 50%, is part-time or contract. So again, it's becoming a much more significant piece in the public sector as well as the private sector employers. Other types of contingent workers could include temporary full-time employees, which would be again your contract workers who are only there for a fixed period of time but working full-time hours. Independent contractors, which again could be self-employed or freelance people. People hired from temp agencies, and again, they're becoming a major part of every employer's workforce because employers don't want to commit to the cost of the indirect benefits, that kind of thing, right? Remember we said that the total compensation budget could be anywhere from 40 to 70%, but 20% of that compensation budget could be, as much as 20% could be your indirect benefits, your health care, your pension, your vacation, all that bunch of stuff, right? So employers are trying to whittle away at that compensation budget by hiring contingent workers. Let's look at executives. I think one of the most staggering things, and I think we've all seen it, is that executive pay has been getting bigger while the pay of the rank and file employees has been stagnating and even getting smaller. Again, it says here that's partly because disclosure laws have made executive pay more visible, right? So maybe in our minds we think it's higher, but I guess the point they may be making here is that it's always been relatively high. But I think what I see happening now, and we'll see it in the next graphic, is that more of the executive pay is not necessarily in base pay. A lot of it is in bonuses based on the level to which they achieve. All right. On the negative side, we do have some top executives that have walked out with a lot of money and driven their companies into bankruptcy. But again, that's not just the executive's fault. Probably the board of directors of that corporation, they decided on how they were going to compensate this executive and what the metrics were going to be, how they were going to measure their contribution. And if they didn't do all that stuff right, then it's no wonder sometimes their companies haven't done well. But in the States, and it says here that it leads the world in executive pay. Executive compensation jumped from an average of 43 times the pay of the average worker in 1960 to more than 100 times by 1990. And I dare say that's gone up even more. All right, the minimum wage in the United States, it varies, but here right now in Ontario, it's around $10.25, something like that, and we're now here in January 2014 as I record this. But in the United States, it's like $8 in some states, right? So it's challenging, when you look at what some of these key executives are making vis-a-vis the average worker. As we can see from this slide, CEO total compensation is extremely high in comparison to their base pay. That's because total compensation includes things such as bonuses, other perks such as improved pensions and benefits, and even stock options. As well, CEO pay has increased such that it's now almost 200 times that of the average Canadian worker in Canada. But how can this happen? In many cases, the argument's made that CEOs are paid for results, So if they meet agreed upon metrics and targets, they will receive bonuses, perks, etc. However, data exists to show that even when many major corporations have lackluster financial results and share prices decline, many CEOs still get their pay increases. The study of compensation really needs to look at how we determine what executive performance is worth and establish controls to disallow bonuses, perks, etc. that may be imprudent to grant. Many CEOs have significant total compensation well in excess of their base pay due to the granting of options and other perks which we discussed before. Main issue, though, is that many of these types of things are favorably taxed by the Canadian government. Some thoughts on how to control CEO compensation include having shareholders vote on CEO pay, as opposed to the board of directors granting it. Perhaps have the board of directors compensation subcommittees accountable directly to shareholders, as opposed to the board of directors or even the audit firms. Another option might be to increase taxes on CEO pay amounts in excess of a given ratio to average pay. So in other words, if your pay does exceed average pay of other workers by 200 times, maybe they're going to say, well, if it exceeds over and above a certain number of times of average worker pay, then you're going to be taxed on that differential. These are some thoughts that are being discussed currently. If we look at our expatriate and foreign employees, I think one of the key questions there is whether the employees are going to be foreign nationals, so they're going to be employees from the foreign country where your subsidiary company resides, or are you going to send people over from Canada or the US to go over and manage your business in China or Thailand or wherever it is, right? Because the compensation policy issues could be very different for each of these groups, whether they're foreign nationals or expatriates, because don't forget the foreign nationals are already in those countries, right? They're already used to the culture, they know the people, they understand the government and how they work, the tax legislation, so there's a lot of things they understand, but maybe the expatriate, the one that's sitting in North America who may go over to this foreign country to manage the business, may not know. So you might have to compensate these people a little bit differently based on what they already know. So the key question is how to create a compensation package that's going to ensure that an expatriate, somebody from North America that goes to a foreign country, doesn't lose financially, okay, compared to their home country peers, but is still cost effective for the company. So again, you want to make sure that you pay them enough to maintain their standard of living and beyond in the foreign country, but you don't want them to be concerned about coming back home after the contract or the period over which they're going to be in the foreign country is up, and then not able to be, based on what they earned in that foreign country, be able to maintain a standard of living from the country they left that they're now trying to go back to, right? So you have to consider a lot of those things. So if we think about it from these four perspectives, right? What are some of the things we should consider with our expatriate and foreign employees? We need to make sure that we provide a standard of living that's comparable with the home country, right? Not just the country in which the expatriate or the foreign national is going to run the business, but again, if the expatriate's going to go back home after, say, a stint of 4 or 5 years, are they going to be able to maintain their standard of living in that home country, right? Negotiation is always important. The employer and the employee have to negotiate what they believe is an acceptable package to each party. The practice, they talk about it as localization, the practice of paying expatriates the same compensation as local nationals in equivalent positions. So you want to make sure that if you want somebody to go there as a vice president of operations or a CEO or a senior accountant, that they're paid fairly based on what that foreign country pays. And again, lump sums. A lot of times what we find is that there are allowances that are paid directly in the home country currency for people. So they might get some bonuses in the expatriates' home country, say somewhere in North America, if they say they're working in China, but they'd want to get some bonuses paid to them in their US or Canadian dollars. But there's also something else that comes to mind when they talk about these lump sum payments. I think it's important to know that a lot of companies now are giving what we call mobility bonuses, where employees are going to be paid a premium as an upfront bonus to remove some of the disincentives of transferring. So, some executives might say, well, I got uproot my family and including my kids. They got to get set up in different schools. There might be a challenge getting them to acclimate to the foreign country. A whole bunch of different things. So a lot of companies kind of treat it like the sports people get. Sports figures get. They get like a signing bonus, right? In order to incentivize them to sign up in the entire contract and stay the length of the contract, to give them a signing bonus. This is kind of the same thing. So it's not necessarily, it could be considered as part of a lump sum, but it's specifically called a mobility bonus, something to get you to sign up right away so that you would be, more inclined to follow through with the contract and go over to that foreign country and work. And again, a lot of times those lump sum payments and again, those signing bonuses or mobility bonuses would be in your home country currency. So if you're in the United States going to China to work, we'd be giving you that bonus in United States currency, American dollars. So now, just as on our final slide, as we always do, make sure that you stay organized, know what's coming due this week, next week, and beyond. Hope you have a great week and enjoy your time in the course, on the job, with your families, whatever your plans are for the week. Have a good one.